launch quickly, like launch often and like iterate like fast with your customers. And also like charge for your product on day one.
To innovate, you need kind of a different type of work, which is probably deep work, a bit more isolated.
To some extent, I think that's like the power of a first time founder. Like once you're a second time founder, you know how hard it's gonna be. And you know like you can like dissect every little like inch of your idea and find reasons it won't work. Very confusing on like
Yeah.
what this actually meant. And so
Emotional
then that
roller coaster.
someone else replies and goes, "Hey, but like by the way, we use this competitor's product. How is Pyros different?" And we had never even heard of the competitor. Like that's how like naive we were, essentially.
Right. They're choosing people or startups for the people, for the founders themselves. If you could articulate your competitive advantage today, what would that be?
We just work harder than everyone else, really.
All right. Thanks so much, Ari, for being here today. Appreciate the time.
Definitely no, excited to be here.
All right. We're going to start with a lightning round questions, which I would like you to just to answer. So, and then if there's anything interesting, we'll obviously like get back to it and elaborate on that. Okay. Question number one. What was the most challenging aspect of building your startup?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's like every new day is like the new most challenging thing. Like today, our biggest problems is like building out the team and hiring a bunch more people. Um, like maybe a year ago, I would have answered just like growth and like sales and whatnot. And I'm sure a year from now, I will answer very differently again. But today, it's like hiring and like team building.
And what was or is the most fulfilling thing about uh, doing a startup, building a startup?
Yeah, for me personally, it's just hearing from our customers and like having them using the product and like saying good things about the product. I used to be a structural engineer, so like a lot of the customers are doing the job I used to have, and so I can relate to them very closely. And so hearing them using the product and like enjoying it is the most fulfilling part.
Off the top of your head, if you think about other founders who are just starting out and building a startup, what would you say is one of the biggest mistakes that every first time startup founder is making?
I think not talking to customers enough and like building too much product without talking to customers. Like we were fortunate that we had the job and like had the lived experience to build a product based off of. But even still, like we built the product and then went to a customer's office and in going to their office, like saw so many obvious things that we had done wrong. And just seeing someone using it was enough to show us like the things to fix. And we waited too long to even do that.
Awesome. So your team, your startup was selected to be part of YC. What do you think is one reason that your startup was selected?
Speed of execution, like for sure. We don't have the same resume of like our batchmates where like they're all ex-Google engineers or like Stanford Business School. And also it's not like we had a lot of traction. We had been building for like 3 weeks when we submitted our application to YC. So we had almost nothing when we submitted the application. But then by the time we got the interview 2 months later, we had our first customer. So going from nothing to first customer in that short period of time, I think is like the only reason we got into YC.
Awesome. Yes or no? Is there such thing as work-life balance when you're building a startup?
For me, for my co-founder, not really. It's like work-life integration. I mean, we still like take trips and stuff for like friends' weddings or things that need to get done, but even still, you're still kind of wired in. But that's fine. Like we enjoy it. We genuinely like really do enjoy the idea of still being like wired into like what's going on while being able to be a little bit more detached, not in the office and like out with friends and family.
This is your first startup, or based on your LinkedIn, it's not, but I'm not sure. I wasn't sure. I want to clarify that. Are you a first-time founder?
First time founder, like in terms of the real definition of the term founder. Previously, like while I was working full time, me and my friend from high school started like an online e-commerce business.
Mhm.
And that was fun. I mean, learned a lot about like what it takes to build something from literally nothing. That didn't go anywhere, but it was a fun project for us. And it did give me like some good experience on those first early days of Pyros and like the first 3 months where it was just like you're learning everything for the first time. Like, how do you spin up a marketing website? How do you send like automated email like campaigns and things like that? So definitely learned a lot, but in terms of real like VC backed startup, like this is the first time.
Nice. And so did it give you kind of a taste of entrepreneurship and you're like, ah, I think this is something that I want to do in the future?
It did, yeah, it for sure did. And like the real thing that got me with it was seeing like success and seeing progress based on our inputs and our actions. So
Mhm.
we would do really good work, and then a week later, we would see the results of that really good work. And that's what really excited me and like made me kind of convinced that I would do that again in the future.
Mhm. So it was kind of like the impact of the work that you were seeing really motivated you. Nice.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Okay, coming back to Pirros, how was this idea born? Can you talk a little bit about the day when you decided, okay, this seems like a great idea, let's do it.
Yeah. So for a few months, I had like decided that I think I'm gonna like try to do my own thing. Like it was after the e-commerce business, so I wanted to do something on my own. And software for the industry was such an obvious like opportunity because I was like a dual like interest and dual experience in structural engineering and computer science and programming. I'd gotten my minor, and at my full-time job, I was running an in-house software development group. So it was a natural fit. And then the problem statement of like blueprint management and detail management became so obvious to us because we asked some of our coworkers how like they tackle this problem and how often are they recreating the same content over and over again. And so once that kind of validation happened from our coworkers and then from our friends at other companies, it was almost like very obvious that we could build not a massive, like not a VC-backed business or anything, but a sustainable business just off of this idea. And we could do it even with just the two of us, me and my co-founder. And so that was the original like idea. And the original motivation was just we will work for 1 year. We have set aside personal like burn rate for 1 year. And then at the end of that year, we're pretty convinced that we'll be able to replace our salaries with this business. And that was it.
Mhm.
That's all we wanted was just to replace our salaries with the business. And then we got into YC and like raised VC funding. And so everything changed a little bit from there. But fundamentally, we were convinced that we would be able to, within the first year, have a couple 100,000 in revenue that we could replace our salaries with.
Mhm. That's amazing. So the first year, did I get it correctly? The first year you were self-funded completely?
Yeah, it ended up being a lot shorter than a year because we got into
Mhm.
IC quickly, but like the first 4 months essentially were fully self-funded. We were writing code, we got our first customer before we had any outside investment.
Did you have any doubts as you were deciding to embark on this journey? Was there any time where you were feeling that this is not the right thing to do?
If I go back to like that initial vision of like, oh, we can just replace our salaries, I never had doubt in that. But once we got
Mhm.
into YC and saw like our cohort and some of the things that our friends and stuff were building there, definitely had a lot of doubt that like, wow, is this really going to be like as big as like the Airbnbs and the Reddits and all these other like companies that have come through YC? There was a period during YC where a lot of that kind of doubt ensued when sales weren't going well and like growth wasn't going well. So it happens for sure.
Yeah, and what did you do? I mean, you obviously pushed through, but what helped you kind of to keep going and not give up at that point? Because a lot of startups, a lot of startup founders at the time give up.
Yeah, totally. We since our original like motivation was just like getting to a couple 100,000 in ARR, we kind of put it back into that like state of we're actually doing really good relative to that goal. Maybe we're not doing really good relative to Airbnb at that time. But relative to that goal, everything's working. Like things are actually very good. We're just like being dealt with like imposter syndrome or other kind of reasons why we think it's not working. But in the grand scheme of things, things are going really well. And our conviction on the problem and like the space never, like
Mhm.
that never changed. The conviction on the problem and the space never changed. And so it was really easy to just keep pushing that it will get better. Um, as long as like the problem in the space hasn't changed. So everything is still going to work.
And if you think about your cohort at YC, have you like obviously you talked to some of them, right? So what were on average, how were the problems, how were the startups founded? Was it like you, they faced, some of them faced the problem themselves and empathized with it and they created a product based on the problem, a pain point they had themselves? Or was it more like other ways, like you can see a problem in the world, you can empathize with the user, and then you can come up with a creative solution? If you can think
Yeah.
about on average, what do you think was the case?
Yeah, I mean, so YC in our batch has a lot of companies. So I think we had like 200
Mhm.
companies or 150 companies in our batch. And so inherently, when there's that many companies, most of them will not have that same kind of lived experience as us. Most of them are just like engineers who have an idea for a solution to a space that they know loosely about, but maybe they're not like experts in the field. There was certainly like a good handful of us that looked like us, where we came from the industry and like knew the problem really well. But I would say probably like over half, like the definitely the average was that engineers with like really smart people, really good engineers with a problem statement that they're finding interest in. And because of that, there was a lot of pivoting as well. Like even our closest like friends in the batch and stuff have pivoted many times from problems that they were interested in to problems that maybe they had more experience in to problems that they just heard more about and eventually like landing somewhere that they can build for longer periods of time. But during our batch, there was a lot of pivoting for sure.
Oh, so like even during the program, some of the entrepreneurs pivoted from one problem to another. That's amazing. I didn't know that
Correct.
that could be done. I thought like you were chosen based on the problem that you have, problem and the solution that you have come up with. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So,
No, a lot of founders are even chosen despite their problem statement. Like that when they get
oh,
in, they will be told like you are accepted on the condition that you will not pursue this problem and you will find a new like startup to build almost.
oh,
It's like they
amazing.
yeah, they really like the founders, but they don't like your idea. And so they trust that you'll find a better idea. Um, but I
Mhm.
don't like we did not get accepted because of our idea. That's for sure. We got accepted because of us and being able to like execute really fast. And the fact that we had like a founder idea fit for sure, but not
Mhm.
because like someone at YC thought, oh, this is like the next big thing and this idea is the next big thing.
I think that's a great insight for a lot of startup founders because they think that the idea is the most important thing or the problem that you're working on, but obviously, like that's not the case. They're choosing people or startups for the people, for the founders themselves, most of the cases.
Correct. Yeah. It's the founders and like the execution ability of those founders essentially is like the most important thing because essentially they trust that even if you start with a really bad idea, if you're like good enough and like quick enough at executing and iterating, then you'll quickly like meander to a really good idea at the end. And a lot of like YC's big successes have like pivoted, have been like ideas that were different originally and then changed.
Amazing. So, in the lightning round, you mentioned one of the reasons that you were chosen was the speed of execution, right? Which you just rightfully mentioned as well. Can you talk a little bit about, so you were selected for the interview, and
Yep.
then after the interview, after some time passed, can you just give me the story of that and why you think that that's why you were chosen?
Yeah, so I can give you kind of the full story. August like 15th or August 13th, we quit our jobs and started coding like the next day. I was the technical founder, so I started building immediately. And my co-founder Peter started setting up like a website, buying domains, setting up emails, like all the business kind of stuff that goes into it. And that happened for about like 3 weeks, where the YC application was due like September 9th, I think, or September 12th, something like that. And so at that time, we had like a very bare bones product. I wouldn't even call it an MVP at that stage, but we had like a solid idea that the product was working towards. And then we filled out the application, which is just a lot of like questions about yourself and like the idea and the business and so on. We submitted that and then didn't even think about it again because we didn't think we were going to get in. No part of us thought we were going to get in. We just applied for because that's what you do. Like you're an early stage startup and you apply to YC.
Mhm.
And so we completely forgot about it. And then a couple months later, we get this cryptic email that just says like, "Hey, are you available tomorrow for an interview?" And like pick a slot from this like calendar link that only had times for tomorrow. Or like maybe it was, I think we got the email on a Friday and like the interview was on a Monday. So in that time, we like reached out to anyone that we knew, and we didn't have a big network of like YC founders or anything like that, but we did have a few people, like two people that we reached out to who had gone through it before, and they really helped us through like prepping for the interview and just even understanding what it's like because it is very unique. YC's interview is a 10-minute call. There's like no fluff, no introductions, none of that. Like you walk into the Like you get on the Zoom call and immediately they go, okay, now tell me about your business. There's no intros at all. Um,
Wow.
and so we practiced that a little bit, like those 10 minutes. Everybody said it's going to be really, really hard and they're going to like find all the holes in your business.
Mhm.
Fortunately for us, like there weren't any holes in our business just because I think a lot of people who go through the YC interview like weren't as like involved in the business as we were. This was like our full lives for the last 3 months where we would
Mhm.
work together from 8 a.m. to like 10 p.m. every day, no weekends, no nothing, and think about the business. And so when they're asking us questions that we already knew the answers to, it didn't seem that hard. And then one day later, you get the email. We got an email that evening actually that said like, "Are you available for a call the next morning?" And typically, like what is said is that if you get in, you're going to get a call, and if you don't get in, you're going to get an email. And so when we got
Mhm.
an email, we thought we didn't get in, but then the email asked for a call, so it was very confusing on like
Yeah.
what this actually meant. And so
Emotional
the next
roller coaster.
Yeah, yeah. Like me and my co-founder disagreed on what it meant. Like I thought it meant we got in, he thought it meant we didn't get in, essentially. And then the next morning we hopped into the call and our group partner just asked us like, well, like we're happy, like we like everything, but like we're just not confident that you can even like build this, like because we didn't have those Google like resumes or engineering backgrounds like that. And we were able to convince him and then he let us in like that moment, essentially on the call. So that was fun. It was definitely a journey. Like that YC interview process is something very unique and interesting. But once we got in, then like we've scheduled a move to SF. We moved up there, went through the program and everything. And it was great.
Amazing. How long is the program?
3 months. So yeah, January through like I think our demo day was first week of April, and then we stayed in SF for like the rest of April, and then moved back down to LA.
Mhm. Amazing. So t tell me, what do you think, like, if you look back from the beginning as you just joined YC and the end, like, what was how much of growth did you and your startup have?
Yeah, so I mean, as a startup, it's easy to like quantify. I think we had one customer and like $6,000 in revenue when we started the YC program, like in January. And that $6,000, we got it on the same day actually as we got into YC. So the same day we signed our first customer as we got into YC. And probably still to this day, like one of the happiest days of me and my co-founders, like life in terms of achievement. And then by the end of YC, I think we were something in like 80,000, like 80 to, or no, actually while we were in SF, we broke 100,000, 115,000, I think was what we ended the um, time in SF with. And so that was really good in terms of like company growth. In terms of like personal growth, mostly it was just network. Like we met so many people that we never would have had the opportunity to meet and got a lot of investors that we never would have had the opportunity to meet, essentially. Um, we're really fortunate with our investors, like especially like the institutional as well as the angels. So our angel investors come from like former founders and like have founded big companies, worked at like senior leadership positions at these companies. And so they're the ones who can give us so much advice about like what did things look like when they were at 10 people as a company? What did they look like when they were at 100 people? How like what was the most critical hires to make and like problems to solve and so on. So those have been incredible and like those relationships have been incredible that we would not have had without YC.
I want to understand the process of building your startup because you mentioned like you started 8 a.m., 10 p.m. was like this within this 3 months as you were building the product or longer than that. Can you talk a little bit about this process? So you built like a shitty first draft and then you tested it. Who did you test it with? How did you iterate? All of those things. I think it would be valuable for
Yeah,
early stage startup founders.
totally. So it's something that like YC drills into us like pretty heavily, where launch quickly, like launch often and like iterate like fast with your customers. And also like charge for your product on day one, because you might get a lot of people who are willing to like use your product or test your product for you. That doesn't mean that it's actually helping them. They might be just doing you a favor. So we
Yeah.
never had like anyone testing our product like for free or anything. It was just like trying to sell it immediately and get customers and get users. And so our first customers were super impactful in terms of like the feedback that they gave us and like helped us continue to develop the product. But even at that point, like they were getting value out of it. Like it was useful for them. And the product was like, it did like the bare bones and it did the basics of what our value prop is. Today, obviously, the product looks very, very different to that. And that's just continuous like additions and improvements from these discussions with our customers. but that all came in time. The way that we split up the work, because it was just me and my co-founder for probably up until like 200 or 300,000 in revenue before we hired our first employees. And he would do everything sales. So pre-close, he would talk to the customers and have the relationship. So he would have really good insight into what people thought they wanted almost like before they had the product. And then I would do everything post-sale. And so I would talk to our current customers and onboard them and like work with them. And I had really good insight into everything like of our current customer needs and like what they know isn't working in the product today. And that balance was, it worked really well for us because it's like a really healthy tension almost on building for sales or building for like your users. And you definitely need to do a little bit of both.
Did you ever get lonely as you were building the product? I mean, it was just the two of you, right? But did you feel lonely, like anxious, or any of those feelings, overwhelmed?
Yeah, so it was just the two of us. I mean, I think it was great that we had like each other. I don't think I'd be able to do it alone.
Mhm.
Just in terms of like when things aren't going well, at least you have someone else to like pick it up and like pick you up. I remember very vividly, like during YC and stuff, there were periods where it felt like our emotions were like an exact like opposites. Whenever I would have a bad day, he would be having a really good day and it would like even itself out, which is like great. In terms of like loneliness and stuff, definitely like it's a journey that most people can't understand. And so like even like early on and even now, like there's a lot of stuff that I can't like when I tell others, like they can't really relate to it. And so it's like easier just to not like explain all of that stuff. Um, that kind of thing like never goes away. It's like something that the only people who will understand are other founders. And so we keep like a good network of our like cohort from YC and we try to meet every other week so that we can just stay in touch because truly are the only people going through that journey with you and facing similar problems, even though it's not the same company, but they can understand the problems you're facing. Whereas like my friends who are just like working their day jobs like 9 to 5 and gunning for their next promotion, it's like a completely different like problem that they're trying to solve for. And I probably can't relate to them and they can't relate to me on some of these
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, so I believe that having a co-founder really helps because I've tried to start a company alone and it's so difficult because some days you just feel like it's not working. You don't have the an objective voice that says, actually, wait, let's just evaluate. Maybe it's just your feelings. This is what you're feeling today. So I
Right.
think that that's a super important thing. And one of the things YC actually prefers it if you have a co-founder. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I think like it's a lot harder to get into YC if you don't have a co-founder. They definitely prefer it for sure. And it's for these kind of same things that we're talking about here, like having someone else when things aren't going well, and like having like someone else to balance out like emotions and stuff, as well as just the idea of two people can do more than just one person. Honestly, like if I could, I would love to have like a third co-founder, and
Hmm.
that third co-founder would like at this point take over everything technical, like engineering, and like I would focus on products and customers, and Peter, my co-founder today, focuses on like sales and go to market and stuff. Um, yeah, I think like having co-founders is like critical for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. And you mentioned that before even you got into the YC, you always charged your customers. You never had anyone who just tried it. How did you test did you have, because you said you had one customer by the time you got into YC. Before that, when you had this shitty first draft of a project or product, how did you test it?
Essentially just remembering like our own workflows. Like it was
Mhm.
things that we had done not that long ago, really. So if you
Yeah.
think like in early August, we were potentially the customer. And then
Hmm.
by like October, November, like we had the product. So it wasn't that we weren't that far removed and we could like test it as if we were the customer. And then once we did get like a first customer, then yeah, it was easier to test essentially with them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It makes sense. Like if this was a pain point of your own, then you actually know if it works or not. And
Right.
has your value proposition changed a lot throughout this journey of building the startup?
No, I don't think it has. It's expanded for sure, but
Mhm.
like the core value prop hasn't fundamentally changed. We're fortunate that like we haven't had to pivot and stuff. We like the first original problem that we set out to solve. is still the problem that we're solving today. Just the scope
Mhm.
of the problem is bigger today than it was at that time. And the scope
Mhm.
continues to expand like over time and it will continue to expand. But the core like value prop and stuff is making engineers and architects more efficient by not having to redo a lot of work that they've already done in the past. And so storing content and like reusing content, that hasn't changed today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know a lot of people start with one value proposition and then it changes. Obviously, like you said, because they pivot also, right? That
Yep.
also factors that in. Um, how about if you could articulate your competitive advantage today, what would that be?
We just work harder than everyone else, really. Like the 8 to 10 that I was talking about in like the early days is still what it is today. Like me and Peter are
Mm,
at the office from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day. Um, on weekends, like we'll get out a little earlier, but it really hasn't changed. And it just allows us to experiment a lot more. I know like when before Pirros, like I was the biggest proponent of like work smarter, not harder,
mm,
essentially. But then what I realized, like with Pyros, is that it's impossible to work smarter at all these things that you don't know. And like the
yeah,
nature of being a startup founder is that you have to do everything and you can't possibly know everything. Maybe it's different once you're second time founder and so on. You've solved these problems before. But for us, it's like we've never had to spin up a marketing department before. So I would love to work smarter and do it in 8 hours, but most likely I'm gonna not do it right and then need to do it in 16. And
yeah.
the only way to get those 16 hours like quickly is to actually continue like putting the time and effort into it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because like you can work smarter when you actually know what you're working on. And then when you actually have done that before, so you can tweak and improve it. But in this in this case, every single day is like a new problem, a new type of thing that you have to deal with, which sucks, but it is what the startup founders go through.
Yeah,
Um,
it's hard, but it is what it is.
yeah. Do you think it's sustainable? I mean, 8 to 10, like that's a lot. And then you're working on this. Is it sustainable, you think, in the long run to maintain this working hours?
I think it's sustainable up to a point, and it's sustainable up as long as the business is working. Like we've been doing this now for like 2.5 years. It's going to be 3 years soon, and
Hmm.
there's like no signs of burnout between like us as founders. And the reason is because things keep getting better every day. Like it keeps working,
Yeah.
and so the effort that we put in last week is paying off this week. Once that stops working, then yeah, I don't think like anyone can work this much time on something that like they're not seeing the fruits of their labor. So
Yeah.
that's almost like that's almost another like driving force and like driving ambition for us is that to keep doing this, it needs to keep working. And so we better make sure that the hours we put in is like actually paying itself off. Um,
Hmm.
but obviously to a point, like as as things scale and as like the team grows and as like people's like life condition changes and stuff, it's going to look very different. But I don't necessarily think the raw like output is fundamentally going to change. Like we're still
Hmm.
going to be very wired in throughout like the day and stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you said in the lightning round that there kind of is not a work-life balance at this point. But if it's helping, if it's working, if what you're putting in actually gives you the fruit, then you're it's kind of like a game, right? You get this dopamine effect and then you go harder next time because you know it works.
Exactly.
Um,
And for us, it's like if I were to do like an audit of my week, from the hours of like 8 to 6 is like the things that we have to do to keep the business like running and like to just continue like growing kind of like organically per se. And then the
yeah.
things that happen from 6 to 10 are the things that push the business forward, like that next level and like taking it to the next level. Um, so it's really fun. Like doing that stuff is really fun to try to find like unlocks and ways to push the business to the next level. Doing like the 8 to 6 is what I almost think of as my day job. And like doing the
Yeah.
6 to 10 is what I think of as like the project. Like that's the part that we're trying to like push things forward and unlock more stuff.
I love that. Yeah, you kind of have to do the all the shallow work, right? The emails and then the calls and then this and that, things that to keep the business going, and then to innovate, you need kind of a different type of work, which is probably deep work, a bit more isolated. Is that what happens 6 to 10?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like everyone leaves the office and like now it's just me and my co-founder and we can like ideate like new initiatives or like just get deep work time on our own, stuff like that. So exactly like, and I think that that 6 to 10 like part can certainly like shift. Like I could do that at home. I don't have to be in the office. But for now, like it's fine. Me and Peter are going to be at the office and like we might as well.
Hmm. Nice. Was there any time at first when the amount of hours that you put in actually didn't produce the feedback that you were looking for?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like we've wasted so much, like so much time, and like our path to where we're at today has not been the most efficient by any means. Like, if we were doing it again, I would hope that we would be able to get to where we're at today, like more efficiently, like in terms of our own time, honestly, because we've been super efficient on like capital and we're growing fast, so like we're efficient on the time in terms of like calendar months, but in terms of like our own time, we waste so much of it like because we don't know and because we keep learning new things on the fly. So definitely can think of plenty of those, and like especially during like the late stages of like YC, where things like didn't feel like they were going well. It was like, wow, we're like working this hard and like things aren't working. Like, what are we doing wrong? But thankfully, like you make it through that, and it will happen again. Like I'm sure for sure that that stuff will happen again.
Yeah, so you just pushed through. There wasn't any technique that you used or anything that helped you throughout that time.
It was pushing through, but like grounded in that conviction of like the problem hasn't changed, the market hasn't changed,
Yeah.
and our customers are still like the few customers that we had at the time are still liking the product and using the product. And so like there was always that deep-rooted conviction there. And as long as like we could ground ourselves in that and like reassure each other essentially of that, like we were able to get through.
Love it. If you could think about one quality or a characteristic of a founder that you think is super important for any first-time founder, what would that be?
I think there's a saying, I think it's from YC or Paul Graham, or maybe it's just in startup world, but like strong opinions loosely held. And so like being able to make decisions fairly quickly, but like essentially pivot out of them when like new information arises and stuff. Because we've done it like ourselves over time as well, where you get it stuck in like a paralysis kind of like phase. And you don't know what the right answer is, so you end up doing almost nothing.
Mm.
Instead, like just picking something with some like conviction, not like perfect, you don't know it's going to work for sure, but like at least it gets you moving and then you get new information immediately from that. Um, and that was kind of the same with like our product development. We had like conviction that this loose idea like was going to be really good. And if we had spent a lot of time trying to like perfect the idea, we would we would not have like moved as quickly. And it's actually like almost a burden that we have now. We're not as naive as we used to be back in the day.
Mhm.
And like we know all the reasons that things won't work. And so to some extent, I think that's like the power of a first time founder. Like once you're a second time founder, you know how hard it's going to be. And you know, like you can like dissect every little like inch of your idea and find reasons it won't work and then discount the reasons it will work almost. Um,
Yeah.
that will put you in like that will slow you down a lot. And so
Yeah.
being able to not do that
So if you think about it, being a first-time founder is actually a superpower. It's it's better than starting over a second time in some ways, right? Maybe.
in those specific ways, it for sure is because
Yeah.
there were like if we knew everything that we know now, barring like the success, like if I knew all the heartache, like hard parts of this journey, I don't know that we would have like jumped into it as quickly as we did and like gone straight forward as quickly as we did. To give you like an example, we before we had our first customer and like we were doing like calls with people to try to sell them like this product that was like loosely built and whatever. We got intro to someone like in an email chain with three people and said like, "Hey, can we meet tomorrow like to talk about this, whatever, whatever." And someone said, "Yeah, let's meet tomorrow." And then we're excited, we scheduled a meeting, whatever. Someone else replies and goes, "Hey, but like by the way, we use this competitor's product. How is Pyros different?" And we had never even heard of the competitor. Like that's how like naive we were essentially.
Right.
And at that point, we're thinking like, wow, did we just like quit our jobs without like knowing that this product already exists and like things like
Um,
that? Um, Fortunately, it wasn't like a problem. It wasn't a big deal or anything. But like that's how naive we were. And like had we known that, maybe we wouldn't have just quit our jobs and like started. Maybe we wouldn't have ever started this idea, even though it could have been like it is working and is so successful. But like maybe that would have turned us off from the idea and made us try to find something else.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. So you didn't do any competitive analysis, like just to map up the competition, which is what usually the MBA teaches you to do. You haven't done that.
No, no, we never did that. Essentially, our like competitive analysis was just like talking to a bunch of our friends who worked at different engineering companies or architecture companies and just asking them what they do about this problem.
Mhm.
And it's like if 5 out of 5 like working at decent sized companies said no, like we don't have a solution to this, that was enough for us.
Yeah.
Turns out like in the long run that is kind of enough, but
Mhm.
there were like adjacent companies and like adjacent competitors and they just like frankly didn't execute as well.
Yeah.
Um, and not to say like we haven't like overtaken them or like killed them off or anything like that at this point, but like their speed of execution is just much slower than ours. And if they, I believe if they had done what we're doing now, then every company should have a solution like this already like in
Mhm.
place. Like it's a real problem that needs to be solved.
Nice, nice. Last question. If you could look back at your journey, as you were starting out and now, how have you changed?
Yeah, I think like I've changed a lot and continue to change. And I think like each stage of like the company almost requires a different kind of person and a different kind of founder. Like in the very early stage, like the first 2 years or something, like my job and Peter's job as co-founders, like was just to build. Like we had to produce so much like raw output in terms of like engineering from my end, like sales from his end and whatnot. And that was great for that period of time. And we're still like that today. And it's like starting to we're starting to realize that it's time to start to change and like shift to more of like the team building like
Mhm.
aspect and team building environment rather than our own raw output that we can produce. It needs to be like the team output that the whole team can produce. And that requires a very different kind of like person essentially and like different kind of ambition and like process that you put into place. For
Mhm.
us, like the same things that motivate us isn't necessarily going to be the things that motivate the rest of our team. And so we need to be able to like work around that and like work with our team to kind of motivate them for building out like their productivity and their output and so on, rather than just ours.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was super fun. I
Definitely,
think
no, I
that,
appreciate it.
yeah, I think that we had a lot of we have the interesting journey that you went through and a lot of practical advice. So I appreciate that.
No, totally. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.